My mother cheated with a rich boy while my sisters stole $150K from my dad's company, but when I told him everything, he exposed the lover to his parents and left them all broke. I'm 27 years old. I work at my father's logistics company in Michigan, and honestly, I never thought my family would fall apart the way it did. I mean, you always hear stories about families destroyed by infidelity and betrayal, but when it happens to you, it's different, you know? It's like everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you was a lie. And the worst part of it all is that it wasn't just my mother who betrayed us, but also my sisters, Isabella and Grace, who knew everything from the beginning and decided to cover for her while stealing money from my dad's company. But well, I guess I should start from the beginning. So, all of this makes sense. I grew up in a family that from the outside seemed pretty normal. My dad, Thomas, built his logistics company from scratch, literally from scratch. He started with a single truck when I was a kid and grew it into something pretty successful. If he traveled a lot, that's for sure. He was always closing deals or visiting clients. But he was a good father when he was home. My mom, Margaret, was a housewife most of the time, although she eventually started helping with some administrative things at the company. My older sisters, Isabella is 30 and Grace is 28, were always very close to each other, like that sister bond that sometimes makes you feel a bit excluded, but nothing serious. The three of them worked at the company with my dad and me, although I got involved later because I studied business administration, specifically to be able to help better with the family business. Everything started getting weird like 2 years ago. I think, although looking back, it probably started earlier and I just didn't notice. My dad started commenting things to me, you know? Things that at the moment didn't seem so serious, but that now make a lot of sense. He told me he felt lonely, that my mom and my sisters were always in their own world, making plans together without including him, going shopping or to the country club without even asking if he wanted to go. I told him, well, Dad, it's normal. They're mother and daughters, they have their dynamic, but he insisted it was different, that they were actively excluding him from everything. And the truth is, he was right. Because I noticed it too, but I didn't give it much importance. What really made me start suspecting was their lifestyle. Like, suddenly my mom and my sisters had super expensive clothes, new designer bags every month. They went to the spa twice a week, ate at super expensive restaurants all the time. And look, it's not that the company wasn't successful, but we weren't millionaires either, you know what I mean? My dad was always careful with money. He reinvested a lot in the company. He paid us well, but not extravagantly. So, when I asked Isabella about it, because she handled part of the finances, she told me that Dad had given them a special bonus for their work, that it was money they had earned. I thought it was weird, because I hadn't been given any special bonus. But well, maybe it was because they had been at the company longer or something like that. Things got more suspicious when I noticed that all three of them, my mom and my sisters, started being super secretive with their phones. Like if a message sounded, they grabbed it immediately. They went to another room to answer calls. They put their phones face down on the table all the time. And when my dad asked what plans they had for the weekend, it was always something vague like, oh, we're going to run some errands, or we have a girls' thing, nothing that would interest you. I thought, well, everyone has a right to their privacy, but there was something about the way they did it that didn't feel right, you know? One Saturday, like a year ago, I was at home working on some company reports because we had an upcoming audit, and I heard my mom talking on the phone in her room. The door was ajar, and I couldn't help but hear part of the conversation. She was saying things like, I can't wait to see you. And yes, my love, I know. And this weekend he's going to be away again so we can spend more time together. At that moment, my blood ran cold because the way she said it, the tone, left no doubt that she was talking to a man who wasn't my father. When she finished the call, she came out of her room and saw me standing there in the hallway. She asked me how much I had heard, and I told her, enough, Mom. What's going on? And she simply told me it wasn't my problem, that it was between her and my dad, and that I should better mind my own business. That same night, I tried to talk to Isabella and Grace about it, but it was super weird because they both immediately got defensive. Isabella told me, Ethan, don't get into things you don't understand. And Grace added, Mom is happy for the first time in years. Dad is never here anyway. I was like, what the hell? You guys know what's going on? And that's when I realized they not only knew, but were actively covering it up. I told them that was crazy, that they were betraying Dad, and they basically told me to shut up and not ruin things for Mom. I left there feeling sick to my stomach because I couldn't believe my own sisters were participating in this. The next few months were horrible for me, because I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I felt I should tell my dad, but on the other hand, I didn't have concrete proof and didn't want to cause family drama based on suspicions. So I decided to investigate on my own, and believe me, it wasn't difficult because they weren't exactly discreet once you knew what to look for. I started paying attention to their patterns. When they went out, where they went, with what excuses. I discovered that almost every weekend my dad was on a trip. My mom and my sisters went to the same country club. They always said it was to play tennis or to have lunch among women. One Saturday I decided to follow them, which I know sounds kind of stalkerish, but I needed to know the truth. I followed them to the country club and stayed in the parking lot for a while, not really knowing what I expected to find. After like an hour, I saw them come out of the main building, and they headed towards the pool area. But they weren't alone, there was a guy with them. A young guy, clearly younger than my mom, like in his 30s maybe less. He was dressed in expensive clothes, those brands you recognize from far away. And he had that rich kid attitude who's never worked a day in his life. You know what I mean? What I saw made me want to throw up right there in the parking lot. My mom was literally hanging on this guy's arm, laughing, touching his chest, kissing him on the lips in front of my sisters as if it were the most normal thing in the world. And my sisters didn't seem surprised or uncomfortable at all. On the contrary, they were there smiling, talking to him as if he were part of the family. I stayed there sitting in my car for I don't know how long, just watching this surreal scene, feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When they finally got home that day, I was already there waiting for them. I told them we needed to talk, the four of us, and the look my mom gave when she saw me was pure panic. We sat in the living room and I simply told them, "I saw you today at the club." There was a horrible silence for several seconds, and then Isabella sighed and said, "Okay, look. Yes, Mom is seeing someone. His name is Nicholas. And before you say anything, you need to understand that Dad basically emotionally abandoned Mom years ago." I exploded. Literally exploded. I yelled at them. How could they justify this? That Dad worked hard to give us everything, and that's how they repaid him. My mom finally spoke and told me that Nicholas was the love of her life. That they had been together for like 2 years. 2 full years. That my dad and her hadn't had a real relationship for a long time, and that I was too young to understand these things. I told her I was 27, not 12. That I understood perfectly that she was destroying our family for a guy who probably was half her age. She got hysterical and started screaming that she didn't have to justify herself to me, that her marriage to my dad had ended years ago and everything but on paper, that she deserved to be happy. But the conversation got even worse when I asked Isabella how exactly Mom and they could afford all that luxurious lifestyle they were leading. Isabella turned pale and Grace started crying, and there I knew there was something more. I kept pressing them until Isabella finally admitted they had been diverting funds from the company. She said it like that, diverting funds, as if it wasn't literal theft. Basically, they had been creating fake supplier invoices, inflating operating expenses, and taking out the extra money to finance their personal expenses and, of course, to impress Nicholas with their supposed wealth. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. Not only were they betraying my dad emotionally, but they were also stealing from him, stealing the money he had worked his whole life to earn, the money that kept the company afloat, that gave them jobs themselves. I asked them how much money they had stolen, and after a lot of pressure, Isabella admitted it was like $200,000 in the last 2 years. $200,000. I couldn't believe it. I told my mom she had to tell Dad the truth herself, that it was the least she could do after all this. She refused completely, said it would ruin everything, that she needed more time, that eventually she would tell him when the time was right. My sisters agreed with her. They begged me not to say anything, that we would find a way to return the money without Dad finding out, that we could fix this among ourselves. But I knew that was a lie, that they were never going to say anything, that they were going to keep stealing and lying until someone else discovered them. But that night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was up all night thinking about what to do. My dad was coming back from his trip on Monday, and I had 2 days to decide whether to tell him everything or protect my mom and sisters. But honestly, it wasn't really a decision because I knew what I had to do. I knew the right thing was to tell him the truth, no matter the consequences. My dad deserved to know that his wife was cheating on him and that his daughters were robbing him. He deserved to be able to make his own decisions about what to do with that information. On Monday morning, before anyone else arrived at the office, I asked my dad to meet in his private office. He looked tired from the trip, but happy to see me. He asked me how everything had been while he was away. And I simply told him, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be very hard to hear, but you need to know it." The smile disappeared from his face immediately, and he told me to continue. I told him everything. Absolutely everything. I told him about the phone conversation I had heard, about having followed them to the country club, about Nicholas, about the 2 years of affair, about my sisters covering for her all this time, and finally about the money stolen from the company. With each word that came out of my mouth, I saw how my dad was sinking more and more into his chair, as if the weight of all this information was physically crushing him. When I finished talking, there was a long silence. Very long. And then my dad simply covered his face with his hands and started crying. Seeing my dad cry was one of the hardest things I've had to witness in my life. This man who had always been strong, who had built a successful business, who always had the answers, was there completely shattered. He told me he had suspected about the affair, that his instinct had told him something was going on, but he didn't want to believe it, that he had chosen to ignore the signs because the truth was too painful. But the money thing, that had taken him completely by surprise, he never imagined his own daughters would steal from him. The next few days were total chaos. My dad hired a forensic accountant to review all the company's books and confirm the embezzlement, and he also hired a private investigator to document my mom's affair with Nicholas. Turns out Nicholas came from a super rich and conservative family, like old money from Michigan, and he lived off a trust fund his parents had established for him. He had an expensive condo downtown, a latest model BMW, and basically didn't work. He just lived off his trust fund and played golf. The investigator got photos and videos of my mom and Nicholas together, irrefutable evidence of the affair. When my dad had all the necessary evidence, he decided to act. First, he called Isabella and Grace to his office and confronted them about the money. They tried to deny it at first, then tried to minimize it, saying they had only borrowed the money and were going to return it, but my dad wasn't interested in their excuses. He fired them on the spot, literally threw them out of the company, and froze all the bank accounts and corporate credit cards they had. The look of shock they had was almost comical because they clearly never thought there would be real consequences for their actions. Then came my mom's turn. My dad arrived home that same day with divorce papers already prepared and threw them in her face. He told her he knew everything. About Nicholas, about the money, about how she and my sisters had conspired against him. My mom tried to cry, tried to turn the story around and play the victim, saying he was never home, that she felt lonely, that Nicholas made her feel young and desired again. My dad simply told her she had a week to get all her things out of the house because he had talked to his lawyer and had every legal right to throw her out, given that there was a prenup she had signed before getting married. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that my parents had a pretty solid prenup because my dad already had the company going when they got married. The prenup basically said that in case of divorce, especially if there was proven infidelity, my mom would be entitled to very little, like minimal alimony for a few years, and that's it. My mom probably didn't even remember she had signed that like 30 years ago, but there it was, protecting my dad's assets. What happened next was almost poetic in its justice. The private investigator my dad had hired, as part of his investigation into Nicholas, had discovered information about his family. It turned out Nicholas's parents were super conservative Catholics, like those who go to Mass every Sunday and have very traditional ideas about marriage and family. So my dad, in a move I honestly never thought he would be capable of, decided to contact them and tell them about the affair their son was having with a married woman. Nicholas's parents were horrified, absolutely horrified. Apparently Nicholas had told them my mom was divorced or widowed or something like that. He never mentioned she was still married. And when they discovered the truth, and also found out their son had been living this luxurious lifestyle partially financed with stolen money, they decided to cut off all his funds. They canceled his trust fund, took away the condo that was technically in their name, took away the BMW, everything. Nicholas went from being a rich kid without worries to being completely broke literally overnight. And that's when people's true character came out. When Nicholas lost all his money, suddenly my mom wasn't so interested in him anymore. She tried to get back with my dad, literally begged him to forgive her, that it had been a mistake, that she really loved him. My dad sent her straight to hell, told her to sign the divorce papers and get out of his house once and for all. My mom, Isabella, and Grace ended up moving together to a small apartment in a not very nice part of town, because that was all they could afford between the three of them with the poorly paid jobs they got after my dad kicked them out of the company. The divorce process took like 6 months in total, but in the end it was finalized with the prenup completely intact. My mom received spousal support of like $2,000 a month for 5 years. And that was it. Nothing from the company, nothing from the properties, nothing from the savings. Everything stayed with my dad. He also updated his will to completely remove my mom and my sisters, leaving me as the sole heir of everything. I felt weird about that at first, because I had never sought to be the favorite or anything like that, but my dad told me I was the only one who had been loyal to him, the only one who had done the right thing even when it was difficult. My dad also decided not to press criminal charges against Isabella and Grace for the embezzlement, mainly because he didn't want the whole story to come out publicly and damage the company's reputation. But he made it very clear to them that if they ever tried to approach him or me again, or if they caused any problems, he wouldn't hesitate to press charges and send them to prison. I think that was an act of mercy on his part, or maybe he just wanted this whole nightmare to end as quickly as possible. The months after the divorce were strange for me. I kept working at the company with my dad, and little by little he started traveling less and trusting me with more day-to-day responsibilities. I think all this made him realize he had spent too much time away from home chasing business success and not enough time paying attention to what was happening with his family. Now he travels only when it's absolutely necessary, and when he does, he's never away more than 2 or 3 days. My mom and my sisters tried to contact me several times in the following months. First, it was my mom, crying and saying she was very sorry, that she had made a terrible mistake, that please forgive her and convince my dad to give her another chance. I told her there was no possibility of that and to stop contacting me. Then, it was Isabella, who wrote me a long email explaining they had been under a lot of pressure and made bad decisions, but that they were still my sisters and that family should forgive each other. I didn't respond. The straw that broke the camel's back was like 3 months ago when Grace called me crying saying she was engaged and that her boyfriend and she wanted to get married, but they didn't have money for the wedding. She asked me if I could talk to Dad to convince him to pay for the wedding, that after all, she was his daughter and it would be the right thing for him to pay for her wedding. I couldn't believe the audacity, honestly. I told her no, that she had made her choices and now had to live with the consequences, that Dad didn't owe her anything, much less pay for her wedding. She got angry and started yelling at me that I had destroyed the family, that it was all my fault for having told Dad that we were a happy family until I ruined everything. That call made me realize they were never going to accept responsibility for what they did. They were always going to blame others, mainly me, for the consequences of their own actions. So I made the decision to cut all contact with the three of them. I blocked their numbers, blocked their social media, told my dad I didn't want to know anything about them. It's been difficult sometimes. I'm not going to lie, because despite everything they were my family, I knew them my whole life. But I've also realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, honesty, and they demonstrated they had none of those qualities. My dad is much better now, honestly. He started dating someone new, a woman his age who owns her own consulting business. She's completely different. From my mom, she's independent, hardworking, honest. I met her a month ago and I liked her. You can tell she really cares about my dad and not his money or his status. My dad smiles more now than in recent years, and that makes all this worth it. I'm doing well too, I guess. I work longer hours at the company now that I'm basically in charge of day-to-day operations, but I like it. I like knowing I'm helping to build something real, something honest. Sometimes I think about how things could have been if I hadn't said anything, if I had kept the secret like my sisters wanted. My mom would probably still be with Nicholas. Isabella and Grace would keep stealing money, and my dad would live in ignorance, being betrayed by the people he trusted most. I can't imagine carrying that weight on my conscience. Last week I saw my mom at the supermarket by chance. She looked older, tired, different from how I remembered her. Our eyes met for a second and I could see she wanted to say something. But I just kept walking. I have nothing to say to her. And honestly, I don't even feel anger towards her anymore. Just a kind of indifference. She made her choices, and I made mine. And now we all live with those consequences.